President Trump declares war on crime in D.C. Blaze News, the mandate starts right now. Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jill Savage, and keeping Matt's seat warm is Blaze News investigative reporter Steve Baker.
Thanks for letting me, fill this hallowed chair.
Yes, and his long-awaited return. We have missed our D.C. politics editor, Chris Bedford. He is back.
I've missed you guys, I tell you. I'm used to beach vacations with less children than this past one. So honestly, it's a relief to be back at the job.
It's a relief for you. It's a relief for us. It's a relief for everybody in Washington, D.C. right now, because President Trump had a press conference today where he declared a public safety emergency in Washington, D.C. and pledged to crack down on the crime that has plagued our capital.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back. Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly.
All right, Chris. Well, it's your city. We have to start with you. How's the squalor in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, well, it's disgusting. I've been in Washington now for 21 years. And unfortunately, just a few years ago, I had to leave my church, my neighborhood, sell my house, and get out because it became unlivable for families. And it still may be hip and cool for certain youths who have a higher tolerance than I currently have, or that children have, or that women traveling alone have for the dangerous new neighborhoods. But a lot of it just returned to nature. It was let go. It wasn't the victim of some economic collapse or in any actual kind of plague that really had a serious impact on public health. It was murdered by suicide. I've actually got a piece tomorrow about the human impact that I'll dig into of this experiment and its complete avoidability. But the short answer here, the policy side answer, is that there are whole neighborhoods of Washington that have had homeless encampments since I first got here, tented. And these are $800 REI tents. They're provided by Democratic activists. They give them these tents. A lot of these folks a lot of them ought to be in institutions because there's in sad states that cannot care for themselves, and they're preyed upon by drug dealers, and they're preyed upon by criminals. And these guys don't have all these means to have these massive, expensive homeless encampments. They're organized. And a lot of them don't even really know to take off a snowsuit on a 100-degree day. Forget about to have all this equipment. So it's been provided. It's been orchestrated around the clock by Democratic and liberal activists. Now it's become, my street had an open-air gun market taking place in it. I lived on Independence Avenue, just a few blocks from the Capitol. It was completely wild, the lawlessness. And Democrats who are saying that D.C. is safe, who live here, or reporters who are saying this, are lying. They're just lying to you. It's not safe. They can point out that it was significantly less safe just a few short years ago, just last year and the year before, because of a complete and total lawlessness. And I have noticed that the police in the last few months have had since President Trump actually, have had more of a pep in their step. And I've seen confrontations that were generally ignored. But just 6 or 7 weeks ago, when me and Blaze News' head of programming were a threatened menace, nearly attacked by a lunatic vagrant. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, multiple people having called them, they were like, what do you want me to do about it? The guy didn't break any laws. Meanwhile, a block and a half away in full sight, he was stopping cars in the street, threatening to attack the vehicles. And the police are saying, well, what do you want me to do? And I get it, because for years they weren't backed up. For years, they were punished. When DC police, for example, chased a perp who jumped onto a stolen scooter and drove into traffic, thank God, only killing himself, the response of the city council was to ban the DC police from being able to chase criminals. Now, the word gets out really fast on that. Right now, because of before, when I first moved here, there were anti-masking laws in DC. You weren't allowed to wear a mask in public spaces because that led to crime, which anyone with any living memory of Washington knows was a major problem in DC not too long ago, and again today. Now you see 16 and 17-year-olds not in school or anything like that, wearing full ski masks and hoodies in hot summer and spring weather. You know that they're not actually just COVID conscious, right? They're committing crimes, but they're not allowed to do anything because in DC, crime was treated as just the call of the voiceless and the call of the helpless against the evil oppressors who, by the way, were just trying to eat their business lunch outside or go to a ballpark with their family. And I'll get into the human impact of this tomorrow, but even the blue hairs of DC, outside of the elite media circles, have got to be sighing with some relief that the junkie camps on their blocks that just steal their packages all day and overdose and park benches where they're supposed to be made for kids or people waiting for the bus, that stuff is going to be cleared out by federal agents that actually want to have a little bit of pride in DC's capital city.
Chris, we know that the numbers don't lie. We know that the crime statistics are what they are. We know that you don't have to go very far from the Capitol to get into these crime-ridden neighborhoods, just like you explained here. But the cackling hens today responded exactly as I anticipated that they would, and they went right to the well first thing, and that was to decry President Trump's pardons of the quote-unquote hundreds of J6ers who attacked police that day. And then they also added to that the fact that he's bringing in the National Guard, well, that he denied the deployment or delayed the deployment of the National Guard on January 6th as well. Both demonstrably false. And I, as I said, I anticipated they would go there, but it's been every single mainstream media outlet has been focusing on those two issues primarily.
Yeah, that's all they have. And thank God for your reporting, you and Joe's reporting on this subject. That's really shed light on and broken apart a lot of the propaganda and myths that have been used by the federal government, a corrupt federal government, to back up the largest political roundup and prosecution this country's seen in decades and decades and decades, which is what we experienced after J6 with the weaponization of Justice Department against their political opponents and against just random people, and the complete lack of consequences that have actually been shown for, in a lot of spaces, not in all spaces, but in a lot of spaces, turned out to be a completely unjust use of force, sometimes deadly force. And the propaganda that was put out about deaths and murders and things like that against that just wasn't real. Of course, they're going to lean on that because despite having over a decade now of Democratic activists literally ambushing police in Dallas, murdering police, throwing nightly riots against police, and Democratic mayors, Democratic governors, and Democratic city councils defunding police and not backing up and calling them racist. I mean, heck, Democratic activists doing this, walking through Washington, D.C., during the sequel, BLM sequel that we experienced during the Summer of Rage, the Summer of Love, whatever you want to call it, and seeing these white, wealthy women in Lululemon shirts and pants shrieking that black police officers were racist in their faces. It was it's shocking, and it's a massive deflection. It's the kind of thing that you see actually very frequently and with great effect. The good news is they've never had less power. I mean, people have eyes. People have ears. Anyone who lives in the city actually knows. Anyone who lives around the city actually knows. Anyone who fled the city, which, by the way, is a lot of liberals, because it's 94% Democrat. We'll tell them to try and rent a house in Old Town nowadays. The prices have soared with wealthy Democrats fleeing Washington, D.C. It's absolutely soared. All of the suburbs have soared in the cost of living because of all the wealthy Democrats fleeing Washington, D.C. So they're lying. They know they're lying. And once again, they're doing this to own Trump, which, by the way, was a lot of the reason for that entire thing in the first place. Muriel Bowser has actually been kind of a close ally of the president on a lot of these things, the mayor of Washington, D.C., because her city council is crazier than she is. But back in the day, in his first term, she turned the plaza in front of the White House with two of the nicest hotels in the city and a bunch of nice restaurants that were frequented by businesses and lobbyists and politicians. She made that into a racialized protest with violent imagery encampment that was completely lawless. She painted Black Lives Matter Plaza where it used to be, I think, Lafayette Plaza. The things that she did, all to own Trump, actually had reverberating effects on the lawlessness in the city, and now they're reaping it.
Well, I love watching clips of Donald Trump, so we're going to do that once again here because he was actually talking about going through and referencing January 6th earlier today. Take a look.
The Metropolitan Police Department and the federal authorities will be supported in the effort, a really big effort, the 800 D.C. National Guardsmen that we'll put on, and much more if necessary, much more. You remember I said, I offered 10,000 once. Remember I said to a certain person who I thought always was highly overrated, not very competent. But I said, if you need them, we'll give you 10,000 of the military or the National Guard. They turned me down.
Right, J6, Steve, you were talking about it. This is what everybody was trying to bring it back to today. But my favorite interaction on X today was, of course, Nancy Pelosi is going to go out there and say what she wants to say. But Steve, take us through Chief Steve Sund and his response, his replies to old Nancy Pelosi today.
You know, one of the most unique characteristics about what happened in January 6th was this situation with the National Guard. And that is a situation that Nancy Pelosi has continued to lie about from day one. Yet, just only 6 weeks after January 6th, came out, I wrote my second article about that, in which we talked about who was up the chain that day. And as a matter of fact, that was the title of my article, was Who Was Up the Chain on January 6th. That came directly from her own Sergeant at Arms and Paul Irving. And this is when the Chief of Police, Stephen Sund, called him and said, I need the National Guard now. And he said, well, I'll run it up the chain. Well, up the chain means it goes to the DOD, actually went straight to the Pentagon. We had on this very show former Assistant Secretary of the Army, Casey Wardinsky, and again, I'm very proud of the coverage that the Blaze has done, and myself, Joe Hanneman, in covering this. No one has been able to penetrate the National Guard story better and more precisely than we have because of the conversations we've had many times with Chief Sund and with Casey Wardinsky. But what we learned is that the actual Pentagon responded to Paul Irving and said, no, we don't like the optics. That was where that phrase came from. And so therefore they denied that. And what Chief Sund did today on X in response to Pelosi was one of the greatest takedowns, because he brought the receipts, he brought the legal codes whereby he was prevented from calling on the Guard himself, and then talked about how they were delayed. I actually was at the Capitol on the grounds. They didn't show up till 5:30 that day. The violence started before 1 o'clock. That's how long it took for them to get there.
But Bedford, never let the good story go to waste here. There's a narrative there, and Nancy Pelosi is still going to be here to push it.
Oh, she is. Well, this is the Democrats have really relied on this. They've had two things to deal with. One is how much they hate Donald Trump. And the other thing is January 6th, which I remember because I was there the same day Steve was, reporting at that time for the Federalist, until all my equipment went dead. I charged it for a little while and then continued reporting until it was just cleared out at the end of the day. And then returned home to write about it and cover it some more. And I thought, well, geez, this riot's just going to give Democrats the rope that they need to try and hang any person who pushes back against their agenda with. And that's what they did. I mean, my street that I lived on had barbed wire across it, and unarmed, by the way. It was just a politicized show of force. Unarmed National Guardsmen who were deployed there to guard the streets and set up checkpoints. You couldn't access the Capitol without having to scan different IDs. It was to the point that you couldn't meet with political staffers because they didn't want to go through the TSA like checks getting back and forth between it. They had barbed wire around the Capitol and troops deployed all throughout it. By the way, none of it was to protect the residents of D.C. None of it was to protect people like the 3-year-olds who were getting shot and killed by gangbangers. None of it was to try and stop the constant rage to the point that luxury shops all around D.C. would close down and close up shop because they kept on getting raided by youths, and the police would say, "What do you want us to do about it? Just go arrest all the kids?" None of it was to stop the roving ATV gangs and biker gangs that were going through the city, just terrorizing people, or the kids using all the rental bikes to just run into folks on their way to work intentionally. It was all just to prop up Nancy Pelosi's whole political case for why Democrats should remain in power. For a period of time, it seemed like it might be working for them, but you couldn't even win a primary 30 minutes outside of D.C. on that platform anymore. By the time the midterms rolled around. Yeah, and Baker covered that one pretty closely and extensively. The American people were dealing with actual problems, crimes in their cities. They were dealing with grocery bill problems. They were dealing with the insanity that they're trying to memory hole right now of the COVID shutdowns of children's education, the closing of summer camps, the closing of jobs. They're actually dealing with those real problems. And this Democratic propaganda show ruined a lot of lives. But it didn't actually shift American minds because it was seen for what it was.
All right, Bedford, we have about 60 seconds. I'll give you the final word. Is this going to help clean up D.C.?
Well, I'm not sure how long he's going to be able to maintain control of the Metropolitan Police Department. As I understand it, these kind of Nixon-era controls allow the Metropolitan Police Department to be deployed by the federal government under their jurisdiction for a short period of time in order to put down the riots that were pretty common in Washington, D.C. in the 60s and 70s and have returned, but not nearly in the same levels that they were previously. So that'll be interesting, but they do have a lot of resources. Frankly, the federal government has too many police departments, and I guess now they call them, as one DHS spokesman texted me over the weekend when I said, "Is this real? I'm seeing reports all over." He said, "Thank God for the jump out boys, because they are cleaning house and spreading fear through the criminal community."
Bedford, it's good to see you again. Tell Sarah I like that she's organized the books by color behind you. It's a nice touch.
I will.
All right.
Thank you. It was great to see you too.
We'll see you again tomorrow. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll be talking with Matt Kibbe all about the cover-up here on Blaze TV. Don't want to miss it. Next. Well, you walk into the grocery store and you think you know what you're buying until you find out that over 4 billion pounds of meat were imported to the United States last year. And the kicker is it can be labeled like it's right here from America. That's why you have to start thinking like, wait a minute, what is this that we're actually eating? If all these labels can say product of the USA and the meat wasn't even raised here, then what other kind of games are they playing? That's when I looked at Good Ranchers, because they changed everything. You know that their meat is 100% American. You know that it's born, raised, and harvested on local farms, and it's delivered to your door, and it's incredible. I'm a subscriber, and it's worth it. You can get $40 off every box, free shipping, and a free gift in every order for life. And you can choose between the bacon, the seed oil-free chicken nuggets, the Wagyu burgers. You can even swap them out from month to month and try something new. So if you're worried about signing up for a subscription, you don't need to be, because you can pause it, delay it, cancel it anytime. There's no stress or lock-in. It's very flexible. Thousands of people have made the switch already, and the reviews are amazing. So head over to goodranchers.com to see what everybody's talking about. Use the code Jill. You'll get $40 off plus free meat for life with your subscription. Goodranchers.com. Welcome to the table. Well, the latest episode of Blaze TV's The Cover-Up exposes how the same apparatus that created the COVID narrative also created the Russia hoax. Take a look.
All of media went through this ship.
It was a fake story.
The Trump campaign colluded with Russia.
It was particularly the Russiagate story.
A U.S.-financed accident that came out of Wuhan.
Believing the science.
Operation Mockingbird on steroids.
When we looked at these censorship programs, we realized they were trying to re-engineer how people thought.
That makes your blood boil, then you're in the right place. Joining us now is the man behind the docuseries, Matt Kibbe. He is the president of Free the People and BlazeTV host of Kibbe on Liberty. So thanks so much, because we've had you on. We've talked about this series. It is an incredible series. Everybody can go catch up, binge watch it if you haven't seen it yet. But we saw Matt Kibbe in that clip. He's prominently featured in the 5th episode here. So just take us through how we see the COVID link and the Russia hoax link.
So as I got into this deeper and deeper, I discovered that there was a very explicit link between what I'll call the military-industrial complex and the COVID industrial complex. And this episode is about how they create the narrative. So I'll call that the censorship industrial complex. And for people that don't remember, Matt Kibbe was actually pushed out of Rolling Stone magazine for refusing to accept the Russiagate narrative going all the way back. So he's been obsessed about this. And when they went in, when Elon Musk invited them in to do the Twitter files, he was thinking Hunter Biden laptop story. He was thinking Russiagate. And in the process of exposing how the government was in collusion with the media on that stuff, they accidentally discovered, these same guys had blacklisted Jay Bhattacharya. They were blacklisting all of the COVID dissidents in that process. So you start to discover that this isn't really about COVID. It's not even about Russiagate. It's about this massive censorship apparatus that wants to control how and what we think.
Well, Matt, that was one of the most frightening parts of this most recent episode. And by the way, incredible series. It's probably the best one. Well, it is the best one that we've seen so far on this entire cover-up affair. But what was most frightening was the infiltration of our town halls, Facebook, Twitter, etc., by our intelligence services, DOD, CIA, FBI, not just running intel ops, but guiding and directing what could and couldn't be said, and then also guiding and directing who should be taken off or have their voice throttled.
One of the things we go into Kibbe's cutting his teeth during the fall of the Soviet Union, and he's seen Russian propaganda, and he says this is the same thing, except that the media, the journalists, they're not only complicit, they think they're on the team. So they're not necessarily being paid. They're not being bullied like during Operation Mockingbird. They're actually part of the team. So we don't have a free press in this country inside corporate media.
And they'll label you conspiracy theorists, and they'll say, these are wild accusations. Take us into just the conspiracy theory, how this narrative is being used to manipulate us, because everybody knows now it's only a conspiracy theory until you wait a certain amount of time, and then that becomes the truth now.
Intelligence operatives have always used conspiracy theorists as the go-to smear for anybody that's actually exposing something that's actually true. And you saw it throughout Russiagate. You certainly saw it throughout COVID. The most serious people, the most serious scientists, like Jay Bhattacharya is a, now head of the NIH, which is beautiful karma. But, he's a decorated Stanford epidemiologist, not someone who is anyway a fringe thing. But they try to discredit you just by smearing you in that way. And I would say every time they say that now, you should keep digging, because no matter how crazy it sounds, the thing you're thinking, you're like connecting dots like Glenn Beck on a chalkboard, and it turns out that you're scratching at something that needs to be investigated.
Going back to the Russia part of his story, that was very fascinating to me personally. But what was really key was that these journalists that he was referring to over here, they have formed a kind of a coalition with one another in order to spout the approved narrative. Now, one of the things that happened when I was dealing with this and dealing with my own voice being throttled by Facebook in particular, that's where I had my largest following at the time, was that they actually had, and this was incredible, my biggest throttling fact check moment, which I went to war with them over, was an actual Hollywood gossip columnist was fact-checking a peer-reviewed NIH study on masking, a Hollywood gossip columnist.
Yeah. Kibbe points out, I didn't not know this story, but the Aspen Institute, which is heavily funded by government, it's kind of a deep state operation in and of itself, actually had a bunch of mainstream journalists, corporate journalists, come out a year before the Hunter Biden laptop story comes out. And the practice was, let's imagine that there's this Hunter Biden laptop story. What is the narrative we want to come out of this story? And then fast forward, and this was revealed in the Twitter files, fast forward, and they did what they planned to do. So it's like, this is not a coincidence.
So you're on the deep state here. Let's stick with that, because we know this is the main problem facing our country right now. If we're going to have any freedom moving forward, we have to deal with this directly. And we see this happening now with DNI Tulsi Gabbard. She's going through and trying to drop all these documents, specifically with the Russiagate hoax. How do we go forward, and what needs to be done now? Can it just be one office, one person, one group of people, the dig over there at ODNI, that's going to go through and say, okay, well, America, here's the documents. Can it actually be done that way, or do we need it to be on a grander scale?
Well, you have to dismantle the whole thing, and that's going to require legislation. It's going to require budget cuts, and it's going to have to require more than just Tulsi Gabbard, because she's not necessarily surrounded by a bunch of career bureaucrats that want her to succeed in what she's doing. And I would take even a step further, which is why I'm doing the series in the first place, is that we, U.S. citizens, we the people, we need to do it, because this deep state thing is actually deeper than I think any of us even understand.
Did Matt Kibbe, in your interview, because it wasn't really covered in the hour-long version or episode here, did he ever express any personal concerns about his own safety during this coverage, particularly when he got into the Twitter files?
He did, and we touched on it in the episode, but we went deeper. I mean, he actually had the IRS show up at his house the day that he testified before Jordan's committee on this stuff. So he expresses some concern, but he also thinks that he's so public, he's hard to get.
Well, you flashed on the screen a couple of the Russian journalists who had been assassinated for doing just nothing more than their job. And so that's why I wondered if that conversation between you and him, and maybe it was private and you can't go into it, but particularly when you have, because when the IRS shows up at your door, you know, they have a criminal investigation division as well who carries guns.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean that they weren't unarmed when they showed up at the door.
Right. What I tell anybody doing this work, and I'll tell this to you, the only thing that keeps you safe is having a very public, active profile, because then it becomes too obvious. If you're a whistleblower that's trying to keep private, I think that's a very dangerous position to be in, because they know that you're there.
Steve and I frantically taking notes right now, trying to figure this out. When we look at accountability, because that's what this is really all about, we want to go through and make sure that nothing like this happens again. So what does accountability look like in this scenario?
I mean, Rand Paul is going to be calling Anthony Fauci back up before the committee, and everybody would like to see that, and they'd like to see accountability for the specific players who committed the specific crimes. But I think the real story has to be uprooting the architects of the system itself. And that goes deep. And I don't think a president can do this alone. I think we're going to need people like Rand Paul relentlessly doing this, but we're going to need reporters like Steve and Matt Kibbe who are going to do it from the outside, because I think that's really the only way to get at it. You have to expose it, and people have to be so angry about it that you force the political class, most of whom are cowards, to do something.
Now, if Senator Paul brings Fauci back in and he perjures himself before Congress once again, what's going to happen this time? Is there any impetus whatsoever to have the Sergeant at Arms arrest them for their perjury, or to turn them over to the DOJ? Are they ready to do that now or not?
I don't know. We'll find out. That was certainly Rand Paul's calculus when he took the chairmanship, assuming that he needed a DOJ that was willing to fight that fight. I'm hoping that President Trump feels royally screwed over by Fauci's bait and switch on Operation Warp Speed and all that shenanigans that they so obviously have now been exposed to do, that he's willing to get a little bit of revenge.
Well, we're talking about Rand Paul. You were in the state of Texas this weekend for Ron Paul and his 90th birthday party. Take us behind the scenes and just what that was like.
It was so cool. There are so many Ron Paul activists who discovered these ideas. You know, I'm an Austrian economics dork, and no one has done more to spread the ideas of obscure economists like Ludwig von Mises. But it's more of a concert than a think thing. And there was music. Jimmy Vaughn was there, one of my favorite blues guitarists, iconic figure. And I was saying to Steve earlier, there are Ron Paul babies who met at a Ron Paul rally who then proceeded to have their own Ron Paul babies. So we have a multi-generational liberty movement that sort of live and breathe it. It's not about getting someone elected per se. It's about living and breathing these ideas. And they just love and adore that guy. And what a badass he is, chugging away at 90 years old.
We were going to give you grief for not making sure we had tickets before you went down there, but I didn't know how
the aftermarket was brutal.
Right.
It was like trying to get a dead ticket.
I can imagine it was. You know, my first exposure to Ron Paul when he was a congressman, and this was in 1998. I was at a conference in Aruba, and he was the keynote speaker down there, and he just absolutely blew my mind. And the most significant thing that he said to the audience down there is he said that the GOP primaries me every 2 years. And he said, and that's with me not going home to my constituents and telling them that I'm going to bring home the bacon. I tell them that I'm not going to do that, and yet they still put me in office every single time.
So Chip Roy was down there, Congressman Chip Roy, and he was on my show, and he says, you know, behind closed doors, most of my colleagues will admit Ron Paul was right about everything. And I said, how many of them will say that publicly? Besides you and Thomas Masson? He's like, not yet.
Not yet.
We're getting there. The tide is turning. People are coming around. Matt Kibbe, thanks so much for joining us. We always appreciate it.
It's good to be here, yeah.
Yes, go watch The Cover Up. The 5th episode is up as well as all the first 4. So it is a great time. It's there at theblazetv.com. When we come back, we will have Joe Hanneman. We'll get into the Minnesota assassinations. There is so much more to uncover there. Stay with us. No King's Day turned deadly in Minnesota when a lone gunman allegedly murdered 2 state lawmakers and seriously injured 2 others. But the story gets much more bizarre. Here with more is Blaze News investigative journalist Joe Hanneman. So, Joe, thanks so much for joining us because you have done phenomenal work on this story. So just take us through the latest with what you have uncovered.
Well, we're just starting to get into some of the nitty-gritty details. I mean, the suspect in this case, Vance Boelter, is sitting in jail in central Minnesota awaiting trial. He's been indicted back in the middle of July. There was an indictment handed up with 6 felony charges, including stalking and murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband. She's the former Speaker of the Minnesota House. So he has been arraigned. Last week he was arraigned. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, and now they're going to wait. The Department of Justice asked the judge to define this case as a complex prosecution, which that was granted. That gives them a lot more time to prepare for trial than they normally would get under the Speedy Trial Act. So there's going to be a good long stretch now before they're back in court. It'll be about mid-November, and this case might not even go to trial till the middle or later of 2026.
Hey, Joe, it's so good to see you again, even by this manner here. But I'll echo, first of all, something that Jill said. This work that you're doing on Boelter's story is absolutely incredible. It's award-winning work. I encourage everyone to go to the Blaze and pull this up and read everything that you've written so far on this series. Now, one of the things that impresses me most is how you're able to follow this twist and turns in this guy's life. I mean, he has more twists and turns and broken highways than the Western North Carolina after the most recent hurricane went through. How are you able to track this and make sense of it all?
Well, I spent about 6 weeks digging into his background because this story from the beginning just simply did not make sense. This was not a career criminal. This was not a criminal at all. This man was a Christian preacher. He has 5 children. He's been married for nearly 3 decades. He does not fit the profile of somebody who would carry out one of the most heinous criminal acts in Minnesota history. His entire life up until about the middle of May stands at great odds to what happened on June 14th. And so I figured there just has to be a story behind that, something that would give us some clues. And so I went back as far as I could go and continue to do so. I actually found a photo of him today. He was less than a year old and appeared in the local newspaper in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, and tracked his employment, his family interactions, his family history, to try to get a better sense of who this man is. And that culminated this past Friday. I made contact with him in the Sherburne County Jail in Elk River, Minnesota, through the jail's messaging system. And he and I spent the weekend texting back and forth, hundreds of texts. And he's starting to unroll what he says is his story and the reason that he was at those houses that night, which again has another kind of bizarre twist to it, that he did not mean to shoot anyone. He didn't plan to shoot anyone. He claims, going to make citizens arrests. And this was related to the clot shot. He was doing investigations, he said, for 2 years on the COVID-19 so-called vaccine and the deaths that it has caused. And this is why he said he got into this employment. He worked in the funeral industry for 2 years, which was not his background. He was worked in the food industry most of his adult life. And then all of a sudden he stops and goes into becoming an assistant, going out on calls to retrieve dead bodies for funeral homes. And he says now that the reason for that is he was investigating these, what they call sudden and unexpected. And that is obviously that's been a big issue since the COVID-19 scamdemic came up. So I'm trying to peel this back with him slowly but surely, in 200 characters at a time on a text. So as long as he will keep talking, I hope to keep learning from him.
Well, yeah, and you have a piece out about his African business ventures that's up on the website. So just take us through why he's so interested in Central Africa in particular.
Well, this goes back to when he was working, I believe he was at 7-Eleven, and he went to a meeting. He had been involved in some of the business development groups in Minnesota. And in fact, 2 Democratic governors had appointed him to business development groups. So he went to a local county meeting, and the ambassador to the Democratic Republic of the Congo was the guest speaker. And he was talking about the issues they have in that country, which is a huge country, 115 million people. And they have to import most of their food, about 70%, which got his interest because of his background working for Gerber, Nestle, Schwann's. He had worked for Lettieri's, a provider of kind of snacks to go in the convenience food industry. So this got his interest, and he was invited by the ambassador to go to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which he's done at least 3 and possibly 4 times since then, and put together a company to go in and attract Western companies to plant, farmland. A lot of farmland in that country is farmable, but is not being used. So he set up an entire company working with a pastor from Minnesota who was native to that country. And so he spent a lot of time over the weekend explaining his reasoning for that. So he spent years trying to get this Red Lion group off the ground. But, as of the time of his arrest, I think it was kind of fizzling out.
One of the things that I've found most curious about Boelter is that he, since his Christian experience began, he's largely been part of the Pentecostal, charismatic, word of faith stream of Christianity. And that is a generally conservative group, conservative voting group. Yet he has a curious relationship directly with Governor Walz up there. Have you been able to gain any insight from him about that?
Well, the appointments to the business development boards, it's interesting. The media in the Twin Cities just dust that off and say that's meaningless. And it might be. I don't think, there's no evidence that Governor Walz knew him, even though Mr. Boelter makes the claim that the governor ordered him to commit these murders. Now, this was before he kind of shifted his story to this citizen's arrest thing. But there's, outside of that rather wild claim, there's no evidence that Boelter knew Governor Walz or Governor Dayton before him, another Democrat who had appointed him to a business advisory group as well. It does appear that Boelter, he's certainly conservative, pro-life. There's evidence that he has registered and voted in Republican primaries in Minnesota and in Oklahoma, which, that of course sparks from people on the left to seize on that and say, well, as some did, well, this is all on Trump. But this is much more complex, and it really does not have anything to do with what I would say is traditional partisan politics. This is a deeply personal thing to him. I don't know if this COVID story, is going to unroll in a believable way. But, after listening to him all weekend, I can tell he honestly believes that. And we're hoping that he keeps talking so we get a sense of, again, and I haven't gotten to this, but what triggered you? When did you basically snap? Because he shocked everybody that knows him when this happened and he was arrested.
Well, you just said it. The story is much more complex. Everybody go read his stuff. It's at theblaze.com, and go follow Joe on X. Always appreciate the time, Joe.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll wrap up the show with your replies. Donald Trump taking over D.C., federalizing it, coming up next. Well, Donald Trump might be starting with D.C., but he's open to cleaning up the rest of the country. Here's what he had to say earlier today.
But then I'm going to look at New York in a little while. Let's do this. Let's do this together. Let's see. It's going to go pretty quickly. And if we need to, we're going to do the same thing in Chicago, which is a disaster. We have a mayor there who's totally incompetent. He's an incompetent man. And we have an incompetent governor there. Pritzker's an incompetent. His family threw him out of the business, and he ran for governor. And now I understand he wants to be president. But I noticed he lost a little weight, so maybe he has a chance. You never know what happens.
That clip was too good to ignore. So I asked you on X, what other city should Trump clean up after D.C.? Blue Check starts us off and says D.C. is special and the president has a say there. But trust me, I live in a sanctuary city and I'd love to have help knocking our stupid mayor, governor aside and dealing with the crime. So Blue Check, all right, hey, we hear you. We know it's tough out there in the sanctuary city, Steve.
Jill, the constitutional scholars are going to do a lot of hand-wringing over these comments, not only that Trump's making, but also in response to what some of the governors and the mayors and others are saying. But if he lives in Blue Check lives in a sanctuary city, it's probably a state that doesn't have a good governor anyway. But what you need to start voting for is a great governor who can do that on their own without the need of the federal government being involved.
Yes, I am with you on all of that, because I was actually, I'll take you behind the scenes. I was like, Donald Trump, he can't take another city over. DC's federal. He can take it over. He can't just come in there in any state. And then he went through and said what he said. And I was like, all right, we'll ask the question now. Okay, we'll do it today. That's how we got to our poll question today. So Edward replies, let's get back to this. To be honest, I'm on the fence. I want Trump to take care of my business, but yet it amazes me that most people are not willing to vote for representatives, that being the mayor, the governors, et cetera, to take care of the problems. or have become entrenched made of promises of normalcy and of personal enrichment. And I just look at these and most people aren't willing to go through and vote the way that it needs to be voted for, because we see, sanctuary cities, blue states everywhere. And these are the problems that they keep facing. And it's still a problem, and it hasn't gotten any better, but they keep voting this way.
Well, if we go back to D.C., and I don't mean to avoid this particular response here, but back in D.C., you've got to remember the electorate is still 95% registered Democrats there. And so it's not going to change overnight, even if Trump is able to stop the violence and able to quell the statistics and bring them down. As soon as he's gone, the electorate hasn't changed anything. And that's just the point that they're making, is that until that changes, it's not going to get any better.
That reminds me of all the protesters when you and I were eating in D.C. at Butterworth's, and they were like, oh, this food is fascist, this MAGA crowd, it's terrible. That's just kind of par for the course for Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and the protests that I saw, I was just in D.C. last week for 4 days, and outside of my hotel, the protesters have these sirens that they're bullhorns that have a siren function, and they've got them lined up on the ground trying to disrupt business, and not a single cop, and there were cops there, were stopping them from disturbing the peace. This wasn't free speech, but they were doing nothing. And that's just a couple of blocks from the Capitol. I bet that changes this week.
Well, Shelley rounds out our replies. He should show what D.C. looks like in a month and then offer to help any city. If they turn it down, maybe that would change their voters. I think that this reply makes the most sense, because you can offer them hey, take a look, right? D.C., we all know what it was. And then you can see what it will transform potentially into, depending on how long they have to do this.
If they can do that, if they can reconcile themselves to actually seeing the improvement, admitting it, and then doing something with their future vote about that. That's going to be the tough part for any Democrat that lives in that city.
Well, that's the way that, if we were just talking about Washington, D.C. still, you have to go through, and if Donald Trump is in the office right now, some of the conservatives, they have to go through and start taking it back over. That's why Butterworth's, and that's why we talk about it, because it's oh, wow, there is something new and different, and an actual conservative movement that is starting to take place in Washington, D.C.
And if you doom scroll police videos like I do, people around the country are getting tired of it. And they're starting to take community justice into their own hands. And when they're seeing people being violent on the streets, they're now finally starting to step in. Even if the cops aren't there, they're tired of it. They're tired of what's happening in their grocery stores. They're tired of what's happening on the shelves in Walmart and Target, and everything being locked up, and they have to wait 20 minutes for somebody to bring a key to them. They're tired of the things that lead to that kind of oppressive, neighborhood situation. And they're going to take it into their own hands, but they have to do it at the ballot box.
They absolutely do. And that's why we're here trying to bring and shed some light on all the stories every night. Things can change. It might not be easy, but we can get there. And we hopefully don't have to do it with federalization of cities across the country. Hopefully the voters can figure this out. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.